Sheriff David Clarke, Sheriff of Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, is with us on the program to talk about this story and more. Sheriff, thank you so much for your time, sir.
Good to be with you, as always.
It's good talking with you. And talking about this story at Bouchard's on North Martin Luther King and Meineke Avenue earlier this month, an armed robbery. And these guys, they meant business, Sheriff.
You know, it's amazing. It's almost several years ago that I put out the call, and you talked about it, telling my citizens here in Milwaukee County it was time. The time was over for them to outsource their personal safety to the government. No knock on the law enforcement officer, the American officer. They're under-resourced. The 911 system is flooded. They can't keep up with the calls for service. To give you an example, several weeks ago, it took 3.5 hours for Milwaukee police to respond to the sexual assault of an 82-year-old woman.
3.5 hours?
3.5 hours. So when you look at something like an entry in progress like at Bouchard, where do you think that's going to fall on the list? And so, you know, good for that business owner. And, you know, he was the victim, maybe not him specifically, but his store was not too long ago of an armed robbery. So he's faced this kind of stuff before. He's had it. He realizes that he is the first line of defense when it comes to his safety, just like I've been telling people for the last several years here. And, of course, the left went apoplectic. The anti-gun movement went apoplectic when I did it. But it is the reality, not only here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but in a growing number of areas throughout the United States.
Talking with Sheriff David Clarke, and you know the store owner there. I mean, you know, thankfully, as you say, he did have a firearm. He was able to defend himself. An employee was shot last fall during a break-in, according to WISN. So, you know, this is not the first time that this store has been the subject of an attack like this. But you know, you talk about the response time, Sheriff. What is I'm just stunned by that. I mean, has there been any response at all from the police department there in Milwaukee about why it took 3.5 hours to respond to the sexual assault of an 82-year-old woman?
No, the mayor is tone-deaf Mayor Tom Barrett. They are about 250 officers short on the Milwaukee Police Department. In other words, budgeted numbers that have not been filled. He will not hire more police officers. He won't supply money for additional resources. That's why I said it's no knock on the American law enforcement officer in Milwaukee. It's that they don't have the political backing. The police chief, Ed Flynn, he's an anti-gun guy. He's a Michael Bloomberg guy himself. He recently fired a law enforcement officer for doing a pat-down search for his own protection. That officer was then being beaten with his nightstick, and he had to use deadly force, and Ed Flynn fired him because he said he didn't have the reasonable suspicion to be able to conduct a pat-down search. And so what that tells me is these officers on the street do not have the backing of their administrators, the brass, and the political class. So in the end, the citizen suffers, and that's why several years ago I was out leading this thing. I'm not a Johnny-come-lately telling people to do it now. I've been saying this for several years. I saw this day coming. I talked to you guys about it. You've been very supportive of my effort to help beat back this anti-gun, anti-Second Amendment movement that came down on me, and not just locally, but nationally as well. And it's a new day now, and people are going to have to learn that the police can only go so far, and in that time that it takes between you, that you call 911 and the cop actually gets there, could be a while. And I'll say it again. The day is over when it comes to outsourcing your personal safety to any level of government.
You know, Sheriff, I'm curious, clearly the recent calls for additional gun control legislation, gun bans perhaps, expanded background checks, they don't seem to have changed your mind.
No, none of that stuff works. The research is there to show that it doesn't work. And I don't need research. And I tell people you don't need research. All you need is the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment does not say the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed if you have good research or studies. It says, period. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And that could be for any reason. It could be against government tyranny. It could be because you like to participate in shooting sports. It could be for self-defense. We have to continue, as you know, to push back because the left is relentless. They will not give up on this. They'll continue to push. You see some of the stuff the Obama administration is doing now with Social Security recipients and some of the other clandestine measures to enact gun control through illegitimate means. And that's why I said we always have to be attentive. We have to push back and not give 1 inch. I don't want anything done with universal background checks. This stuff doesn't work. All that's done is to put us on this slippery slope toward universal gun control.
So, from a law enforcement perspective and from a civil rights perspective, in that regard too, Sheriff, what do you think can be done? Do you support, for instance, allowing active duty military members on base or at recruiting centers to carry firearms?
I think it's irresponsible not to. These people are protecting our nation abroad. When they come home, they're still under threats. ISIS has made it clear. They're using homegrown terrorists. They have put out fatwas to attack soldiers, military installations, recruiting centers, and law enforcement officers. So I said last week or several weeks ago up to Chattanooga, one of the things that I'm looking at now is to rely on the assistance of the armed American citizen to help defeat attacks on the homeland. That's what we're going to have to do. That's what we're going to have. Look, some of these recruiting centers, many of them, they're in commercial retail areas, which means the public is nearby. That's another threat on the law-abiding public, but it's also another source for me to be able to withstand or defeat an attack once it starts. You know it yourself, and everybody out there with half a brain knows that these sites are chosen because there will be no armed resistance for quite some time, so they can commit as much mayhem and carnage as they can before they're taken out.
Talking with Sheriff David Clarke in Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, and in that regard, Sheriff, certainly there's been no shortage of calls for those same additional gun control laws after the shooting in Lafayette, Louisiana. You say that that's not the answer. We've seen a couple of cases very recently where it appears individuals who were prohibited by law passed their background check. I keep seeing these headlines that this guy in Louisiana purchased his gun legally. Apparently not. He passed a background check, but that doesn't mean that he actually legally purchased the firearm. Does this highlight, in your opinion, a need to fix NICS rather than expand it?
Oh, precisely. It just demonstrates, I think, wholeheartedly the fallacy in this notion that gun control will work, universal background checks will work. Look, where there's a will, there's a way. We need to do what we can. And I think most, if not all, gun enthusiasts and supporters of the Second Amendment would be on board with this. We need to do what we can to keep guns out of the hands of certain individuals, like felons, like people who will perpetrate violence with the use. They've shown that they'll do that. People with mental health, and I want to put an asterisk by that because that thing is it's too broad as far as I'm concerned. In other words, you walk in one day and you tell your doctor, I feel a little down lately. A little depressed, and it might not even be clinical depression. You're just using this word rhetorically, and that doctor now would have to report you, and you would be prohibited from going out and get a firearm. And so that's why I said I want to put an asterisk next to that. But, here in Wisconsin, Governor Scott Walker once again demonstrated his support for the Second Amendment and people to be able to defend themselves when he ended the 48-hour wait. We had a 48-hour waiting period in order to purchase a firearm. Well, now the background checks are instantaneous. They take less than a few hours in the majority of cases. And yet in Wisconsin, even if your background check was done that day, you still had to wait 48 hours. Well, he signed a bill in my office recently that ended that. So we have to continue to chip away and wear away at the stuff that the left has accomplished over the decades in terms of restricting our rights to the Second Amendment.
To that end, Sheriff, I know that we more and more, I think there seems to be recognition that when it comes to violent crime, vast majority of it is perpetrated by a very small number of individuals in any given community. When it comes to mental health issues, it seems to be the same thing. That a very, very small percentage of people who would fall under that mental health rubric actually pose a danger or a threat to others. It seems like in terms of the violent criminals, we're starting to see ways to identify this. First of all, the criminal record, right? And so we can isolate these individuals, hold them out for a higher prosecution, reduce the chance they're going to get a plea bargain. We can target them. How do we go about it? And is that even a job for law enforcement to go about identifying and getting the folks the help that they need, the mental health that they need? Because it's not a matter of throwing these people behind bars. That doesn't seem to help the situation. If we're talking about somebody who's mentally ill, it seems to me like you've got to try to identify those individuals who are at most risk, and then make sure that they have the help, even if that means that they are involuntarily committed, but it means that they're getting help.
Well, you indicated that a very small percentage of people with mental health issues would go out and commit mass murder. All right, I think it's a slap in the face to people who suffer from mental health or know somebody that does, that anybody that has mental health is a risk to go out and slaughter people in a theater on a college campus. That's an insult to people suffering from mental illness. So we're talking about a very small percentage. And I think that excuse in the criminal justice system is overplayed anyway. Anytime you get a mass murder, right away the defense attorney says, mental illness. Well, maybe. I'm not saying that that's not the case. But look, 99.9, because nothing's 100% of people who suffer from mental illness know right from wrong when it comes to walking into a movie theater, walking onto a college campus, walking into a church, and slaughtering people. 99% of people who suffer from mental illness would never do that. So when you ask, what should law enforcement do? There's no silver bullet for this, no pun intended. There just isn't. But there are some things that we can do better. Most of the violence that we're talking about, street violence perpetrated in our urban ghettos, are done by career criminals. Our criminal justice system has created a revolving door where the cops go out, they make a good case, they make a good arrest, they put a case together, and then the criminal justice system spits them back out in the community under some alternatives to incarceration, low bail, watered-down prosecution in exchange for a plea bargain. And then that individual goes out and perpetrates a violent crime once again. The police can't do anything about that. So there are some things from a public policy perspective that I've mentioned. I've talked with you and your listeners about it that I think would reduce the likelihood of all of this urban violence. But keep in mind that the left's goal is not to reduce urban violence. Their goal is to undermine the Second Amendment so that people like you and I, law-abiding citizens, cannot have access to our Second Amendment rights. For the left, it has nothing to do with urban violence. They really don't care about it.
Sheriff David Clarke of Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. Listen, I appreciate you coming on the program, sir. It's always a pleasure and a privilege getting a chance to spend some time with you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You bet. Sheriff David Clarke with us here on NRA News, Cam and Company, sponsored by Nosler.